Hello everyone and welcome to this month's Access Control Coaching Session. My name is Cole Nebeker. I am the Training and Event Manager for PDK, and I am particularly excited for this session because it's going to be a little bit more unique than some of the other coaching sessions we've done. Instead of picking a specific topic, we're actually going to have kind of a wide diversity of topics in this session. The title for this is PDK Tips and Tricks. And the way I figured we would format this is I would reach out to several certified gold and platinum dealers prior to making this video and get some of the tips and tricks that they've learned over time installing their PDK access control systems and other systems. You're going to notice that there's not really one specific thing they focus on, but a whole diverse array of things that they focus on. So that's what we're going to be covering in this session, is some of the PDK tips and tricks that you might not find in the user manual or something that you may just learn from years of experience on the job. So as always, make sure to like and subscribe. We're constantly trying to push more and more content to the YouTube channel to be a little more engaging, a little more user-friendly as a learning platform. Hit that bell icon as well so you don't miss out on some of these future things. We do these once a month, these coaching sessions, I should clarify. We do these coaching sessions once a month, the first Tuesday of every month. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump just right into it. This one doesn't have any videos. We're just going to go through some of the stuff that I wrote down. I've broken it down on categories. So if I recall, I think we have like 12 or 13 slides here of different categories of topics of things that were discussed by these installers when I reached out to them in preparation for this video. So let's start with wiring safety and best practices. One of the things that I learned, actually, and unfortunately somebody learned this the hard way, is not to run wiring behind the boards. And I've actually been guilty of this. In fact, in my previous session where we talked about elevators, I had run some of my wires behind the board. But I was actually advised that you should not run your wire behind the boards because there are some sharp contact points on the back of the board from the connecting of different things to the board that can actually puncture wires, and if they're electrified points, they can cause a short and even a fire. And I guess this story had come from somebody who had inadvertently lit their board on fire, so probably best to just follow that practice. Don't bundle your high voltage and low voltage wires together. That one's kind of a common practice, but maybe something that isn't seen as super important until you actually experience that. Avoid grouping high voltage lines with weakened communication wires. The way that weakened works is it uses two contacts for the power, the positive and the negative, and then it uses a data 0 and a data 1. And the data 0 and data 1 are using a 5 volts transmission back and or rather from the reader to the controller. And 5 volts is prone to any kind of interference. So running high voltage lines directly next to weakened lines, even if shielded, can cause some communication errors. Even if intermittent, it's not ideal for any case for your weakened wires to be interfered with. Now, we recommend that you do not use cat cabling when wiring readers or locking hardware on PDK systems specifically. That's not the case for every system. Some systems are built a little bit different. But for PDK systems, you will want to use stranded wiring for all of your reader communications and all of your locking hardware. Do not try to run especially high amperage locking hardware through cat cabling. Cat cabling is just not very thick anyway, so you're going to have a bad time with line loss. Always bring a multimeter on site with you. This was one noted by one of our installers because they said one of the first times they called into support, they called in and said, hey, we need help with this, and support said, hey, can you measure what kind of voltage and amperage we have going through that line? And they're like, well, I didn't bring a multimeter. support is only going to be as helpful as some of the tools you have on site. Obviously, there's some things we can do from our end. If it's software related, it's not especially critical that we have a multimeter on site. But if it is going to be something power related or a piece of reader or locking equipment that is not working, the support team's only going to be able to help you as much as the tools that you have on site. So come prepared. If you're going to call into support, especially about a power related issue, make sure you have a multimeter with you. And finally, test as you go, not at the end. That was just a common, in fact, that was across a wide range of the people that I reached out to. They just noted that some of the times when they finished an install, they realized they hadn't tested anything, and when they brought it online, they realized that a specific component was not working, and they had to disassemble all the hard work that they had just done. So test as you go. So for example, test the reader, test the cable, test the controller, test the lock, test them all independently of each other, especially those components that are in hard to reach places. Now for power management, here's another thing that I knew of, but I didn't know was recommended per se. Backup batteries should always be used on PDK PoE installations. Now the reasoning for that, and this was actually something that I went to engineering for, was it assists controller power management on differing switches with different ramp-up times. So PoE switches are not all identical. They all have different timings and different amounts of ramp-ups, and some of them even push a surplus of power through before dialing it back to the recommended PoE voltage. So to accommodate that, it is recommended that you have a backup battery on there to help mitigate any power differences between those switches. So backup batteries, in this case, should always be used on PDK PoE installations, which is pretty easy. I mean, any PDK board capable of PoE has the backup battery ports. Discuss your desired backup power times with your customers. And this is especially important on exterior doors of a building, because as soon as the batteries run out, your doors unlock. So it's important from a security standpoint to talk with your customer about how long they expect that the mag locks will be active. Obviously, the ideal answer is forever, but that is just not the way that mag locks work. So make sure you discuss with your customer beforehand so that you don't just set, let's say 4 hours, and then the customer comes back and says, wait a minute, I thought these were going to work indefinitely, kind of like the strikes on the inside of the building, and you'll have to explain kind of how mag locks work and the expectations. And you know, it may be a case of where you have to explain to them, hey, it's going to cost you a lot of money to provide backup power to these mag locks for more than 4 hours or 8 hours, whatever it ends up being. Now, another note from one of our, I believe this was one of our gold dealers, maybe it was our platinum dealers, don't use onboard power for mag locks, use a dedicated power supply. Now, I know it's very tempting to power your mag locks directly off of the onboard power. You have roughly an amp per port, and that's actually the last point on this page. But to cover that real quick, you have about an amp of power per port. So theoretically, yes, you do have more than enough leeway for your mag locks on your port to power it directly off the board. The reason that they would recommend that you avoid this is A, to meet fire code. It is usually recommended that you tie your mag lock in with your fire panel to drop power when an FACP is activated, as well as to stay within your amperage budgets. If your the word slips me right now. When you power on the mag lock, you may exceed that 1 amp budget allocated to you and end up just in a reboot loop. Mag locks are going to be more power hungry than your typical strike, so lots of our installers recommended that you just use a dedicated power supply for your mag locks. Now, along the lines of strikes, you'll want to install a diode on every strike. We do recommend this, and it's actually in the quick start guide. So I'm kind of going outside of the scope of this presentation where I talk about stuff you won't find in the Quick Start Guide. But a lot of people forego it because they don't believe it's important. And I can assure you it is very important that you install a diode on every strike. And that prevents your voltage feedback to the board, causing issues with overcurrent or other power feedback problems. And finally, I've already kind of talked on this, avoid exceeding 1 amp per port on any PDK board to avoid tripped breakers. That is your budget that you should stay under, including your inrush current. That's the word I forgot earlier, your inrush current. You'll want to make sure you stay beneath that 1 amp. Now, for your door hardware and locking. One of the ideas set forth was to use mag locks with built-in DPS to simplify the installation and provide valuable door status alerts. Upon talking about that internally, I realized that was kind of a controversial statement. I guess they are somewhat difficult to install, but I'm going to stand by it. We had somebody recommend that you use mag locks with a built-in DPS. The reason for that is because I am a firm believer that you install a DPS on every single door. It is just such a cheap and cost-effective way to improve the capabilities of your access control system. Not only does it allow you to do door prop notifications and see actively whether a door is open or closed, it allows you to do door forced notifications as well, which is another very important security focus. So that leads to my second point, spec every job with an included DPS on every door. I will admit that was my own point that I decided to inject in there, so that's a shameless plug. Next point, always wire a REX as a direct disconnect when using mag locks. Now this typically comes down to fire code. In theory, yes, you can tie a REX in just as a software disconnect even on a mag lock. However, your fire marshal will not be happy with you if you do that. Every state's fire code is a little bit different. And because of that, I'm not going to try to say I know the fire code for each state and each location in each county. If you have questions on what your fire code is, reach out to either your city or your county fire marshal. And I am certain that they will be more than happy to help you meet the applicable fire codes. However, as a general rule, it's just easy. Just tie the REX in as a direct disconnect when using mag locks, and if it's something like an infrared motion REX, you can tie the other side of the relay into the B input on the PDK board for your reporting purposes. And that way you're not just blindly opening the door, you can still do your door forced alerts, but you are, for all intents and purposes, you're actually releasing the door based off of a direct power cut. If your REX cannot be wired as a direct disconnect, use external relays to assist. The example given here was of a gate, actually. It was using a loop under the pavement for the disconnect, and the distance limitations were so extreme that they had to defer to external relays in order to accommodate that. So you can use third-party relays to assist you in your efforts to make sure that you have a safe form of egress. Now, relays and I/O. Excuse me. One of the things brought up was that people who were new to PDK systems saw force open and force close and were unsure what those meant because the terminology is different from other access control systems. So to define those, force open and force close are actions taken on a relay to force toggle the relay into that position. So a force open force toggles the relay into the open position, whereas the force close action force toggles the relay into the closed position. Now, the reason that some people didn't understand what this meant is because there is an on-forced alert in the system, which indicates that a door was opened without a valid credential or REX input. I talked about it a little bit like 2 minutes ago. That is where you have somebody getting through the door and the DPS activates without either a valid credential or a REX input. So there's a lot of forced terminology in the system. So don't get those confused because otherwise you might write a system rule that isn't actually applicable to your situation. Forced open and forced close are relay actions. An on-forced alert just means that a door was opened without a valid credential or REX input, and that one does require a DPS and a REX. There's no way to separately control devices connected to the same relay. Now, a lot of you veterans in the industry probably already understand this. Relays are a single device that do a single action. They are either in the normally closed position or the normally open position. You can't separately control devices on the same relay. So for example, what we see a lot of in support is people that tie a door lock into one side of the relay and then a door piezo into the other side of the relay. Their expectation is that they have a piezo activate after the door has been propped for 15 seconds. And that's just not how it works. The relay is only going to act in one certain way. So my example here, you cannot tie both a strike and a piezo into a single relay and have the piezo activate after the door has been opened for 15 seconds. Plan your relays accordingly. If you want to do that, you would need to have two separate relays. You would need to have one that actually unlocks the door for the specified amount of time, and then if the DPS detects that a door is open for 15 seconds, for example, you can have a separate relay trigger and activate the piezo until that DPS is closed. Now you can also use third-party I/O devices for specialized tasks. I didn't get too deep into this because there were a lot of examples given, but you can use other I/O devices or other relay devices for your more specialized tasks. There's a lot of different kinds of relays out there, and whether they are designed to operate in a slightly different way from our relay, or maybe there's just a larger quantity of them, or maybe one input and several outputs, or whatever the case is. Maybe it's acting just as an isolation relay. You can use those third-party relays for more specialized tasks on the system, especially if you don't need them to be reported within the system, just perform a specific function. While the aux8 works for elevators, integrators sometimes forget to include a door controller for the elevator's reader input. This is a common mistake. The aux8 is 8 inputs and 8 outputs. Now, the aux8 does not include a reader input. So, let's say you have one elevator with 8 floors. Great. Well, you would spec an aux8, obviously, to control those 8 different floors. But sometimes people just forget to include an extra door controller for the reader component of the elevator. You still need a reader in order to be granted access on the elevator, so make sure you include at least a door controller per elevator. And that door controller will have your reader input and an additional relay. For your cloud nodes and controllers, this one, if you've installed PDK before, you probably already know this one. This is more for the new integrators to PDK. Every site requires at least one cloud node. So the cloud node for PDK is going to act as the head-end unit, and it's actually the bridge from the on-premise components to the cloud. So you need to have a cloud node per site, and it does a couple of things. It coordinates all the communications between all of the controllers, but it also hosts all of the database on site in case you lose internet connectivity. So if one site has multiple networks, you may actually need several different cloud nodes. If a cloud node can't see the other controllers on a network because the controllers are on a different network, you either need to create a bridge between the two networks, which if you're IT savvy, you can definitely do, or you just need to get a separate cloud node per network so that they can all see each other. You can add multiple cloud nodes into the same customer, and that part's not a problem, but you do need to be able to have the controller see a cloud node, whether it's just a single one or whether it's multiple. Along the same lines of the cloud node, don't lose the lid. Typically the lid will be attached to the unit and locked in place, but sometimes people just take the lid off and discard it. And that's typically fine until you need to identify what the cloud node is and you don't have access to the software. The Cloud Node lid has the Cloud Node assembly serial number on it. It always begins with 107. And if you do not have access to that assembly serial number, it's a bit of a chore to find it. You can find it on the local network. It identifies on the network as its serial number, but it becomes much more of a task to find it. So usually what I do, if I have a cloud node, so for example, my training cloud nodes, I travel all over the place, and frankly, the lids always get mixed and matched, and they always end up on the wrong cloud node because they don't get matched up. So what I do is I actually write the serial number on the shroud inside for safekeeping, and some installers do that too, where they just use a Sharpie and write to the side of the onboard controller. There's a little bit of space there on the yellow can over the shroud where you can write down the assembly serial number. And that's what I recommend, just to make sure that you always have access to that serial number and don't have to go on an Easter egg hunt to find the correct serial number. Another point on the cloud node. Do not plug the cloud nodes into a passive PoE switch. The passive PoE switch meaning that it provides constant PoE without toggling on or off, with a complete disregard for whether a device is actually PoE capable. The cloud node itself is not PoE capable, so do not plug it into a switch that is consistently providing PoE power. You will fry it. You will need an Ethernet connection, and you will need a power connection separately for the cloud node. Excuse me. Now, lots of people recommended that you you update the cloud node before going on site. These cloud nodes are sold through distribution, which means it may have been several weeks, several months since it was last in PDK factory. So it may be pretty severely out of date. If you update prior to going on site, that will help prevent any delays or waiting on site. Most updates are fairly quick, but if you're very far out of date, it may have to go through a couple of different generations of updates. And if a customer's internet is especially slow, it may take a little longer to push that update through. So it's always worthwhile just bringing it online at your shop, maybe the day before the install, and making sure that it fully updates. In fact, some installers recommend bringing the entire system online at the shop to ensure everything is operational, updated, and configured for easy installation. Everything from the cloud node to the controllers to the readers, everything. The controllers do have firmware as well. They're not nearly as advanced as the cloud node, but they may still receive some firmware updates from the factory, in which case it may be worthwhile getting them updated before you do the installation. Now, switching gears a little bit into wireless. Fun fact, wireless is extremely prone to interference. This was a coaching session that I just did. But to recap some of the important points about this, pools or large bodies of water can interfere with, absorb, or misdirect wireless signals. That is a universal truth of wireless signals. They can be blocked, interfered with, absorbed, misdirected by water. Amongst other things, you have metal, concrete, brick, mortar, high voltage, elevator shafts, conflicting wireless signals. So probably what you don't want to do is try to broadcast a WiMAX signal across, say, a pond. Let's say you have a community of homes and you're controlling gates. It may seem easy to just broadcast a wireless signal across the pond to another gate, but that will be extremely susceptible to dropping wireless signals. So just make sure you account for wireless interference of any kind pretty early on in the planning process. Now, another thing with WiMAX, or wireless, I should say, is PDK can run off cellular routers or satellite routers. So you can plug the cloud node just directly into either a cellular router or a satellite router for remote locations, and that's actually very common, maybe more than you would expect. In fact, that's what I do when I go to industry events. I just plug it into a cellular router. When I do a training in distribution, I plug it into a cellular router. This helps with installations, maybe things like park bathrooms, remote storage facilities, gates, campgrounds. Those were ones that were specifically mentioned. And pretty minimal data is needed. Oftentimes it's less than 5 gigs per month. Obviously it's dependent on the size of the site and the amount of data running through it. But you can reach out to your sales rep for estimates on what your site may need, and we can collaborate internally to determine the average amount of data needed for something of an equal size. Now, readers. PDK Gold and Platinum dealers universally recommend OSDP readers wherever possible. And there's a lot of reasons for this. OSDP has a lot of capabilities that Wiegand does not. Amongst this are going to be reader updates, remote diagnostics, and troubleshooting and encryption. Effectively, OSDP helps prevent the need to roll a truck. It allows you to do a lot of the diagnostics remotely. Now, on reader runs shorter than 25 feet, we actually recommend you use a 10K resistor in line with the power of your reader to prevent surges. And funnily enough, this is especially applicable with HID readers for some reason. So, to prevent any kind of surge, just run a 10K resistor in line with the power to prevent surges. You can reach out to support for more info on that. When you're doing a takeover, make sure that you verify the credential compatibility. There's nothing worse than swapping out a bunch of readers with PDK readers, let's say a red reader that has no prox capabilities, but you kept all the old prox credentials. You need to make sure that the frequencies of the credentials line up and the encryption protocols as well also line up. If you have that kind of incompatibility, you're going to have a bad time. You're not going to be able to do a seamless takeover, and you're either going to have to replace all the cards on site or you're going to have to replace all the readers on site. For your installer best practices, this first one I cannot stress enough. Take your certification, retake the certification, review the certification before your first install. The LMS is always available. Once you purchase the PDK certification, or after your first person at the company purchases the certification, it becomes available for the rest of time. You can always go in, especially since we're always pushing out new software features, new hardware, and things like that. You're always going to have new things that you need to learn and be on top of. So just get into the LMS, accesscontrol101.com, and review everything. Make sure you and your technicians are well acquainted with the knowledge base, which I just mentioned. Or I'm sorry, no, that's different from the LMS. So the knowledge base will be the support.pdk.io and other resources. Another shameless plug on my part is PDK's YouTube channel. The YouTube channel, like I mentioned right at the beginning, we're trying very hard to make more engaging content, more educational content, and more frequent content. So be sure to constantly check back and see if there's anything like these live coaching sessions where you can learn something new. Now, when calling support, another note is to be honest. This came from one of our installers. Exaggeration of any kind or unclear communication leads to lengthy delays and setbacks in a resolution. Our support team is awesome. They answer 80% of support calls in 20 seconds or less, and to be frank with you, it's usually higher than that. It's usually like 98% most days I've seen. So they answer the phone quickly, and their primary goal is to get the problem fixed as fast as possible on the first call. And so they're going to walk you through some of the most common diagnostics, and honestly, just being honest with them and not exaggerating on any of the problems or frustration. Obviously, it's frustrating when you have a problem. So just getting through as quickly as possible your list of problems and then trying all the feedback that they recommend is going to get you the fastest resolution. That is my suggestion is when you get through to support, list out your problems, what you've tried. They'll walk you through anything that you haven't tried. And then from there, it's usually a case of, okay, is it fixed? No? Okay, maybe we need to try further things. And if they're out of things, they'll escalate it to tier 2 and then by proxy to engineering. So do not exaggerate. Be very straightforward with them. Understand nobody wants you to be having a problem. Support does not want you to be having a problem. And the sooner everyone can get it resolved, the happier everyone is. Now, set clear expectations with your customers prior to installation. This one's kind of vague and intentionally so. I got some feedback that indicated that anytime they were unclear with their customer, it always came back to bite them. And that doesn't mean anything negative necessarily, but being fully transparent about what you are and are not going to do is going to be very helpful. So for example, maybe you say, okay, I am going to provide you this much training, but all of the rest of the training, you're going to have to rely on maybe some documentation or videos or something. So they don't come back and say, hey, I need to know how to create this very specific report and custom rule wherein this happens and this happens and this happens. And you're like, well, that's not within our scope. Being very upfront about what you do and where the responsibility falls on the end user or maybe their IT team, it's very valuable. Along those same lines, make sure your customers know who to reach out to for support with their system. PDK is a partner-centric company, and we provide all the support we can possibly provide to our installers. Worth noting, though, we don't actually provide the support directly to the end user. Now, we do provide resources that can provide support to the end user. We have the knowledge base, we have the YouTube videos, we have our installers that provide support to end users. But sometimes we have end users call into support and they're just like, hey, we need help with this. And support has to tell them that's not within what we do. We support the installer who installed the system and support them in assisting you. So make sure your customers know who exactly they're supposed to reach out to for support. Now, there's a couple of things you can do to assist with this. You can put a company sticker on the enclosure, which is very common. We have lots of ways to custom brand the enclosures through some of our distribution partners. Or put your company support contact information in the PDK Access app. If you use the PDK Access app, your customers can actually find your support contact information inside of there using the customized support contact information. And that's another really great place to put it because they're typically going to hit the support button in the PDK Access app when they're first having an issue. But most importantly, teach your customers how to use the app as well as give them an overview when you first install of people, groups, dates, and live events. Those are going to be the things they're using the most. If you're feeling especially educational that day, you can also give them an overview of reports as well, and maybe some of the other fields within there. All right, site preparation and data setup. So this is what you're going to do prior to an installation. First of all, if it is a takeover, make sure that you pull the customer database from the old platform prior to that. So most, if not all, access control platforms are going to have the ability to export the user and cardholder information. Admittedly, that format that you pull it out on, it's probably not going to be the same format as PDK's system. So what you'll need to do is export it and do a little bit of copying and pasting. So PDK's CSV format includes first name, last name, cards, groups, email, partitions, pins, enabled and disabled, things like that. And it's probably going to be called something different in the other system, but it's usually pretty straightforward. You can just copy and paste. Very worst case scenario, you may need to have Excel merge a couple of columns together. Excel, Google Sheets, whatever you want to use. Learn to export that as a CSV and learn the PDK CSV import and export process. Within the PDK system, you will have a button where you can click and drag a CSV import to import a new list of users and cardholders. And likewise, you can also export the cardholders out of PDK.io, especially if you need to make changes en masse. To save time on site, upload users prior to going on site to install the equipment. This is a really easy step and something I would highly recommend. You can create the customer's dashboard prior to going on site or installing any equipment. And the nice thing is you can do some pre-site setup where you have your people added in, your groups created, maybe some of your reports predefined, whatever you need. So that's what it's there for. Use it. Go in and create all your users, make sure they're up to date and accurate, and make sure the groups are as well. Upload as much information as possible in advance, making only minor changes and delegations on site. Obviously, you won't be able to finish your groups until you assign doors to those groups, which you'll have to wait until you're on site and have installed those doors. But it's much easier to do that than to create all of the users on site. So bring your Cloud Node online prior to going on site. Give it time to update, especially if your customer has a slow internet connection on site. Kind of mentioned that in a previous page, but that was a very commonly brought up tip by lots of PDK installers. For your hardware and network preparation, some integrators recommend always speccing an 8-port switch with every PDK install in case the customer does not have sufficient infrastructure to accommodate enough Ethernet connections. This one was really interesting. Something I hadn't really thought about from my side is just how common it would be for an end user to not have enough Ethernet ports associated with their site, especially if they're transitioning from something on-premise to cloud-based. They're probably using a different kind of connection from Ethernet. And so some integrators just by default spec an 8-port switch just to cover themselves in case they do need additional Ethernet connections on site. And it would depend on the size of the site. Obviously, if you're doing a 1 or 2 door setup, you probably won't need that. But if you're doing a couple dozen doors, or maybe you're doing a bunch of 1-door controllers via Ethernet, you may need to make sure that the site actually has enough Ethernet connections. So when installing a Red 8 or Red Max, be sure to include enough Ethernet ports on the customer's switch to populate every board. If they don't have enough, make sure you include a switch. The Red 8 requires 2 Ethernet connections. The Red Max requires up to 6. Now, as a recommendation, one of our installers recommended the Altronics NetWave 5B. It's a board provided by Altronics, of course, and it actually has magnetic standoffs so you can mount it inside the enclosure. And from there, you can just run patch cables from that board over to your PDK boards. So again, to reiterate, many takeovers do not have enough Ethernet ports for a cloud-based system. Take some extra time to ensure you have planned for everything. You don't want surprises on site, and you don't want to have surprise costs associated with your system. For your cable management and labeling, a lot of this is common installation etiquette. Label cables clearly and strip all the way back to the knockout or wall openings. Use sticky back tie downs to organize wiring in the enclosure. I didn't include a picture of this, and in hindsight I probably should have. These are really nice. I use them to manage wires like in my car for like a dash cam. I wire it underneath the dash. Those are really nice because they're permanent enough to stay organized, and they're also very adjustable. You can just snap the tops off and pull the wire out if needed to reroute things. But they're not obnoxious, like let's say a zip tie. If you zip tie everything down, somebody in the future, if they want to do a service call, they're going to have to snip all of those zip ties to service the cable and then re-zip tie everything back down at the end. So there's lots of space in the back of the enclosures for you to run these sticky back tie downs. And those are nice because they're semi-permanent without being obnoxious. If the cables aren't labeled correctly at the panel level, use live events to relabel. That was a recommendation given by an installer, especially on a system where you're maybe taking over the management of it and your company did not do the installation. If you're trying to sort things out, you can very easily utilize live events to determine which panel you or which port you are at. An easy way to do this, and I know this is what our support team does to determine if like a REX is working, is they just take a little jumper cable, just a tiny little double-sided piece of copper cable, and they put it into the B and negative of the port, and that will activate the REX of that particular port, and you now know, okay, I'm working at this port of this panel. Okay, so that pretty much covers it then. I suppose I forgot to say this right at the beginning, but if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments. I don't see any that have come through just yet. Now, I am on a bit of a buffer, so I'm going to drag on by about 30 seconds here while I wait for any comments to come through. Like I said, these are hosted once a month, the first Tuesday of every month, on a variety of topics, and we've got some really good ones coming up as well that I'm very excited about. We do these live because we want people, as questions come up, to have the opportunity to address those questions live in the comments section. And so that's kind of the goal with these sessions, is to allow live feedback and live question asking. As mentioned at the beginning, be sure to like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon as well so you don't miss future notifications of these kinds of events coming through. And, well, let's see, what am I missing? I don't think I'm missing anything. Just waiting a few seconds to see if any questions come through. I guess we have Chicago ProConnect coming up, so if you're in Chicago, be sure to stop by. It's our final ProConnect of the year. It'll be October 16th, I want to say, 15th, 16th? I think it's the 16th. And that'll be in Lisle, Naperville area.
Question.
Oh, we do? The question's not coming through on my side in that case.
What's your favorite tip and why?
Oh, here we go. My favorite tip. I just like the common sense tips because I think a lot of times people just get so in what's the word I'm looking for? They just get so used to doing things the same way that they've always done them that they sometimes forget the most simple things are going to be the most important things. So for example, a lot of times I get pushback on installing a diode on a strike. They're like, well, why do I need to do that? Well, just do it and you won't have any issues. Not in every case is a diode strictly necessary, and not in every case is not installing a diode going to give you problems. But in the cases where it does, it's worth the extra 10 seconds to install the diode as close to the strike as you can get. So I don't know if I have any one particular favorite tip other than the stuff that you always hear reiterated time and time again. Okay. Well, join us again next Tuesday. Not next Tuesday. Next month on Tuesday. I can talk. It's not early or anything. And we will catch you next time for the next Tip Tuesday. I appreciate all of you joining.